have you ever tried to really get into a new hobby? Or maybe tackle a complex skill? It could be anything. Optimizing something at work, learning an instrument, or like we're talking about today, choosing, the perfect plant for your garden. You often hit this wall, right? Just information overload. You start off curious, excited even, and then suddenly you're just drowning in specs, jargon, different varieties, conflicting advice. It's a lot. So, the real trick in any kind of deep dive, we think, isn't just finding more information. It's about creating a filter that works for you. How do you find that specific piece of knowledge that fits your unique situation, your microclimate, your budget, your style, the space you actually have? Today, we're diving into some research notes that focus on this really rigorous, almost, well, ruthless process of selection when you're scouting for plants. And our main case study is this one particular plant. Seems perfect at first glance, Allamanda Cathartica, Jamaican Sunset. We'll look at why, despite seeming ideal, it was ultimately rejected.
Yeah, and that rejection, that's actually the key part of the sources we've got here. It's so important. This deep dive is really about realizing that success, whether it's gardening or, managing a project, sourcing materials, it involves balancing that initial attraction, the aesthetics, the great marketing, maybe a really cool name, with the hard practical facts,
Yeah.
the maintenance, the actual fit. It's just not enough to know the specs, the facts about something. You absolutely need to know if that thing works with your reality. And that's the big difference, isn't it, between just collecting facts and actually applying wisdom.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that. Starting at the beginning of this gardener's journey. The strategy. The main advice in these notes for anyone wanting to find something new is this idea of proactive discovery. The author really emphasizes breaking your routine, visiting different nurseries, maybe ones you don't go to often, instead of just hitting your usual spots. Why is that simple change so effective against information overload?
Well, what's really interesting is how that advice applies pretty much anywhere you're sourcing something. If you only look where you always look or, use the same search terms online, you basically create an echo chamber for yourself. You might find small improvements, sure, but you're probably not going to stumble onto something truly new or different. By physically going somewhere new, a different nursery, a new supplier, maybe a trade show, even just a different part of the library, you're kind of engineering serendipity. You stop just looking at specs on a screen and you start evaluating real possibilities through a very efficient real-world filter.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts you from just passively searching to actively filtering. Like, I could look up thousands of plant varieties online, right? But if I walk into a new local nursery, suddenly that list is down to maybe, 50? The ones the experts there decided were actually worth stocking and growing in my specific area.
Exactly. You're tapping into local expertise, local conditions, availability. And here's the key thing for fighting that info overload. You're drastically cutting down the options. You're filtering by looks, by suitability for the local climate, and by what's actually available right now all at once. That really helps avoid that paralysis you get from staring at endless web pages.
Okay, it's a great filter, but let me just push back slightly here. Isn't that filter still limited by what those local shops happen to have in stock? Doesn't searching online still give you technically more optimal choices, even if they're harder to get?
That's a fair point, absolutely. But the notes seem to suggest it's more like a two-step thing. Online research gives you names, specs the theory, you could say. But the scouting, the actual visit, that gives you the vital feedback. It's where you observe. And as we'll see with this Jamaican Sunset, seeing the plant in person gives you data on aesthetics, size, health, stuff that no online description can truly capture. It forces you to deal with reality, not just the marketing pitch.
Ah, I see. So the scouting trip is almost like the quality control check for the information you gathered elsewhere. Okay, so using that powerful strategy, getting out there, actively filtering, let's talk about the specific find. The notes highlight this Allamanda Cathartica Jamaican Sunset. Did it initially seem like a winner?
Oh, absolutely. At first glance, yes. I mean, the name itself evokes this whole tropical vibe, doesn't it? Jamaican Sunset. It's classified as a perennial shrub, but the defining thing about its structure is that it grows as these vigorous woody vines.
Okay, vigorous woody vines. That description right there, that's the first technical bit that should maybe make a gardener pause and think about commitment level. But let's stick with the initial appeal first. The foliage, it's noted as glossy, leathery, dark green. Sounds like a really rich, perfect backdrop for some bright colors.
It does, and the sources really talk up the flowers. They're described as large, funnel-shaped or trumpet-shaped, and apparently they bloom profusely all season long. So when you hear profuse bloom next to that dark, glossy foliage, yeah, you're imagining a real standout plant, a showstopper.
And the official color descriptions seem designed to heighten that tropical feel. What exactly were the colors listed for this Jamaican sunset type?
Officially, they're described as apricot, peach-colored, or salmon-pink. So, that range of warm tones really suggests this soft, inviting vibrancy, like a real sunset effect, maybe changing a bit through the season. It's a very strong pitch, especially if you're looking for something unique and colorful. On paper, it seems to pick all the boxes. Tropical look, specific warm colors, blooms a lot, looks great.
You'd think, okay, perfect find, trophy discovered through smart scouting. But this is where the notes take that critical turn. Despite the really compelling description, the great name, the gardener decided against this cultivar. And this gets us to the core lesson, right? What were the specific reasons? What led to that rejection?
Well, it seems like it failed on two fronts, both aesthetic and practical. And they both highlight that gap between what's promised and what you actually get. Let's start with the look, the aesthetics. The gardener specifically noted that even though the colors were described as apricot, peach, salmon pink, in person, they just looked rather dull. And that's such a critical moment for selection, isn't it? Doesn't matter what you're choosing. Specs on paper, they're often idealized. You have to ask, okay, why does a plant called Jamaican Sunset look dull in reality? Could be the lighting in the shop? Maybe.
Yeah.
But often it's just that the marketing language, well, it exaggerates. That implied warmth, the saturation.
Yeah.
It just wasn't there in the actual flower.
Right, it's observation beating the specification. Like if you were choosing, say, metal parts for a project, the spec sheet might promise high durability, but if you look closely, you might see flaws from manufacturing. You have to trust what you see right now over what the seller promised.
Precisely. If the main reason you want something, a plant, a product, is its look, its aesthetic appeal, and it fails that visual test right in front of you, then the deal's probably off, no matter the other specs.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only problem here. The notes also flagged that structural issue pretty clearly.
Ah, yes, back to the vines. The inherent difficulty of dealing with vine-type plants, especially those vigorous woody vines we mentioned, for someone who maybe doesn't have a huge garden space, what does that technical term actually mean in terms of, like, real-world effort?
Yeah, this is where you get into the hidden costs, the overhead required. For a gardener, vigorous woody vine doesn't just mean it climbs nicely. It means you are signing up for significant, possibly monthly, pruning and training. Serious structural work. This plant isn't just going to behave itself. It needs strong, permanent support, like a sturdy trellis or an arbor, and constant, dedicated management to keep it in check and looking good. So, if the gardener has limited space or maybe doesn't have the right support structures ready, that vigorous growth suddenly turns this potentially beautiful plant into a massive headache. You're essentially trading a potentially small aesthetic gain for a huge investment of time and effort.
That raises such a key question, and it applies way beyond gardening, doesn't it? Is the complexity of this thing compatible with the resources I actually have? Like, choosing software, it might have amazing features, but if using those features means hiring a full-time admin to manage it, well, that's your vigorous woody vine right there in the tech world.
Exactly, it is. And the notes emphasize that particularly for people with smaller gardens or maybe not enough direct sun, which can make viney plants stretch even more aggressively, the complexity just becomes a deal breaker. Yeah. Even if the color had been stunning, the sheer amount of management needed for those vines was just too much for the gardener's specific situation, their constraints.
So the outcome was really driven by this dual rejection, a critical look at both sides. The aesthetic criteria, the color vibrancy, just wasn't met in reality. And the practical criteria, the maintenance needed for that vine structure, was simply too demanding for the resources available. The author sums it up by saying, yeah, it was interesting to learn about the species, but they firmly decided not to pursue it for their own garden.
And that firm conclusion? That's crucial. The real skill demonstrated here isn't just finding the Allamanda Cathartica, it's having the discipline to say no and walk away from something that looks great on paper, but just doesn't pass the reality check.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here? This scouting story seems to offer a really powerful two-part lesson. Part one is clearly about the value of that proactive discovery, getting out to different places, broadening your options, and using reality as your main filter.
Right. And part two is the absolute necessity of critical context-specific rejection. Knowing about the plant, the facts, that's useful data, sure, knowledge is good, but applying that knowledge means matching the plant's actual characteristics. It's, duller than expected colors, it's demanding vigorous woody vines against your own reality, your space, your sunlight, your time, your personal judgment. You have to be willing to reject things, even appealing things, that don't truly align with their goals.
It's like the ultimate defense against the sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? You've done the research, you found this thing with a great name like Jamaican Sunset, glossy leaves, trumpet flowers, but you have to be willing to say nope if it's going to cause months of trouble or just doesn't deliver the impact you actually need.
Absolutely. If you're too hesitant to reject an option that sounds good, whether it's a plan or a project or anything else, you often end up stuck with something complex and disappointing that doesn't really fit your resources or achieve what you wanted.
Which leads us perfectly to our final thought for you, the listener. If even a plant with such promising features, glossy leaves, trumpet flowers, a name like Jamaican Sunset can be rejected because in reality it was just too dull or too much work, what unexamined assumptions might you be holding about color or structure or maybe complexity the next time you're choosing something new to focus on in your own interests or projects? When was the last time you really trusted your own observation over the marketing hype?